I have played thousands of 1d4 games in my life, and in this video I will teach you some very interesting strategies that you can use with the London system. So I won't be focusing too much on the opening moves themselves or on memorizing anything, because I always believe it's best to try and really understand your opening instead of trying to memorize everything. So for the London system, I start with pawn to d4, bishop f4 and knight f3. You can also play it in the other move order. And then of course, if you are familiar with the London, we will be building a pawn triangle, putting the knight here, putting the bishop here. At least that is the general plan. And here black, very early on, they propose a trade of bishops. And there is a very interesting strategy in the London that I actually haven't talked about that much. And that is to just ignore this threat. And with ignoring, I mean we won't play the bishop back. We won't capture. Those are usually the most popular moves. Instead, we can play this pawn to e3. And here my opponent didn't do anything, but sometimes they will capture, and then you can just recapture and you will have this pawn structure. And although at first sight it looks like you have a little bit of a damaged structure, this is actually a very interesting pawn structure to use because you have double pressure here on e5 and there are a bunch of things going on. They didn't capture it right away, but we are going to see if they will capture it in the future. So what am I thinking about? Basically, I want to develop my bishop, maybe develop my knight, play pawn to c3. But right now I won't develop my bishop because I never really like allowing black to attack your bishop with no reason. So it's usually best to play c3 first, so you can take away this one square from the knight. And now they are grabbing it, so we are going to get this variation here with the pawn here. And there are actually two different approaches you can take here. So first of all, if you have already developed the bishop, that's fine. If you haven't developed the bishop yet, as is the case here, you can actually play this move, pawn to g3. And let's say black castles, you can play bishop to g2 as well and keep your bishop here on the long diagonal. And this is quite a different style of London system to what you will usually see. So I am going to play this in this particular video just because I want to demonstrate that this is also an opening, even though you will not really see many players go for this with the bishop here. And the plans for white are very simple. We want to play this type of setup, and then we basically have these two pawns attacking the e5 square, plus we also have this pawn guarding the f4 pawn already. So for example here the queen is not really doing anything since we already have some protection. What are we going to do for the rest of this game? We just want to keep developing pieces, so as usual knight to d2 as a logical plan. And the only real way for black to fight for any counterplay against this opening is to try to push this pawn to e5. Because by pushing pawn to e5 they can try to somewhat open up the center. Well, we have this extra pawn here on f4. The importance of this extra pawn is that we can use it, of course, to protect the e5 square. So if your opponent pushes, you don't really have to think about this much. You are just going to grab it with this pawn. That was already from the beginning the reason why we wanted to play the pawn here on f4, so that we could protect. And now things will be opening up a little bit, and that is where it will be super useful that we develop this bishop to the g2 square, which is something you usually don't see that much. Because here we have two choices. I think we can take with the pawn or we can take with the knight. I think both of those are possible. It's probably just going to lead to a massive exchange, but at the end of the variation we will have this bishop opened up. And if we take with the pawn first, that is also possible. I will actually take with the knight first because that immediately opens up my bishop. So even in the case where black would not capture, it's still fine because I already have this opened up bishop and I also have a knight into their position. But my opponent here is going for this massive exchange. And now at the end of this exchange, we still have a very strong bishop. So this is very different from other London strategies that you have probably already seen, but I think this is a super interesting middle game strategy to know. You shouldn't try to always go for this, but sometimes you will have the opportunity to play this. And then I think it can be very interesting. Now we are actually finally, I think, really in the middle game. And there are a couple of different plans here. One of the plans is, I will show you, to develop our queen to the queen side. So for example, queen to b3, because we have double pressure against this, and also we have pressure against b7. So it makes it hard for black to ever develop the bishop. They would lose this. And also, if this pawn ever moves, we have two attackers. So queen to b3 is a very interesting move. We also pin this pawn to the king, so there are a bunch of benefits from this move. One other move we can also play is rook to e1, attack the queen. The queen has to move, and then you can do something else in the future. There are two plans here. You can still think and some variations to go with the queen to b3, but the problem is, in every line that you play rook to e1, you are always weakening this f2 pawn. So you have to watch out that you don't fall for checkmates. So yeah, you probably have to play something like knight f3 first. So what I am going to play in general is not this variation, because you can already see that black suddenly has three attackers, and although it is still fine for white, we are not losing. This move looks normal, you can play it, but you will have to defend this perfectly for 4 to 5 moves, and then you will be able to continue. So that is why I will just keep my rook here, move my queen, and that also comes with the benefit that now we can still do the same trick. We can still attack the queen, but we can do it with the rook that's not really doing anything. So in general, I think this is honestly the safest and most solid out of both options. This one is a little bit more tricky because you have to defend. So I would recommend to play queen to b3. Yeah, now we don't have to think much, honestly. I think we can just develop the rook to the open file, attack the queen. And you can see how from the opening, we have basically immediately gone into a very good middle game. Where if you look at this objectively, you would say this bishop is for sure stronger than this bishop, or rook is for sure stronger than their rook. The queens, you could say they are about equal, but honestly we are a little bit more aggressively placed and attacking, while the black queen is defensive. And I think both of the knights are actually a little bit passive right now, not really doing too much. So in general, the advantage here really lies with white. Where should you try to continue with your play in a position like this? Well, it is important to learn to always evaluate the position like we just did, and then after evaluating the position, you will know what plan to go for. So one of our benefits is that we have this queen and this bishop lined up. So that is very simple. I hope you can realize that this is some tension here. There is some defense going on here. This bishop is defending, this is defending, this is defending. So usually the best thing we can do is we can continue with that plan in some way. So how could we potentially do that? There are a couple of things. You could, I think, play pawn to c4, which I think makes the most sense. Because if black were to take this, we can take with the knight, attack the queen. Suddenly we have two attackers here. We also have some discovery tricks here, so a bunch of things suddenly will open up. If they don't take, most likely they are going to defend, in which case we can still take. Let's say they take with the knight, and now still the knight is pinned, and there are also some variations in which you can create an isolated pawn. Is this endgame winning? Probably this will be closer to a draw, but we are getting into a position where white might potentially have chances. So I would always recommend to play this type of move here, to play pawn to c4. Because even if they take, even if they defend, I mean, and you take, of course you don't have to go for the full trade. You could also play something else, like for example you can open up your knight all of a sudden, open up this rook, and you can just continue. I honestly wouldn't recommend trading everything. But you can see how the entire black position basically depends on them keeping this pawn on d5. If we can remove that pawn, their entire position is going to collapse. And now we have to calculate, because a lot of things are going on. The opponent played the bishop here, so we are suddenly in a very, very tactical position. Whenever you find yourself in a difficult position, but honestly almost always, it is best to use the CCT strategy: checks, captures, and threats. So those are the types of moves you want to calculate first. We don't have checks, so I want to calculate captures first. And I do have a capture, this capture, and this capture, and I think this capture as well. We have 3 captures. So those are in general the best things to potentially calculate. I will actually start by calculating this rook capture, because I think it looks interesting. Because if the queen takes the rook, I had some idea that I was pinning this queen to the king, but the problem is they still have the knight as a protector. And then at the end of this variation, I think we honestly just, yeah, we just lost the exchange, basically. So just a quick calculation, this, and the knight is protecting. Doesn't work. One other capture we have is this. We can just capture this pawn in the center. Let's say they take with the bishop. We take with the check. If they take with the queen, they are losing this knight, and they cannot capture our knight because they are pinned. If they take with the knight, I think we might also have a pleasant position, going in with our knight, starting an attack, maybe pinning this to the queen, so that looks interesting. So this is a move I am considering playing. One more capture we have is just queen takes b7. We are probably going to get attacked by a rook, and then we have to start thinking how can we maneuver out with the queen, and it's not really super obvious to me how we are going to save ourselves. So this move looks like it's going to lead to a pleasant position, so that is why I am going to play it. We take. There is a chance for my opponent to completely go wrong. If they had captured this with the queen, they would basically be dropping a piece, which I think many of your opponents would probably have missed. This is a 2200 rated chessbot, so it's not going to miss this type of move. But now this can't be good for black. You see, this is attacked, this is pinned. We finally have some freedom for our knight as well. So in general, as I said, this CCT, checks, captures, threats, is a very good thinking system. Here we don't have a check or capture unless if we give away a queen, but that's not the right move. But we do have a threat. We just have a simple move attacking the queen. So oftentimes, if you don't really find anything spectacular, those types of moves can be great. One other thing that I didn't mention here is, again, we can still grab this, but I already calculated previously that the moment this rook swings over, we basically have a trapped queen. So yeah, that's why I didn't talk about this anymore. But you might be wondering, why didn't he capture the free pawn? It's because we lose the queen. They put it here, and I hope you see that there might be tactics here because we have a discovery trick set up. Discovery meaning we can move the knight and we will have a discovery attack on the queen. So in a position like this, you basically have to check out your knight and think, are there potential squares I can go to, or maybe even this square, where I can continue with some tricks. Because the queen will always be under attack, so we basically have a free move. So very important to calculate. The most simple one is honestly probably this. We are attacking the knight twice. We are also attacking the queen. The queen has to move and we win the knight. So I don't think there's anything they can do. Or maybe they have to sacrifice the queen. In which case probably we have to take with a check first, make them move and then grab this. One other move I was looking at is, for example, knight to c5. It's also a double attack. Let's say they try to hold on, and then still I am thinking about something here. But we already have, I think, an immediate win if we play the knight here. And that is how you can sometimes find those more complicated tactics as well. You have to recognize the patterns, like I recognized this was a discovery pattern. And then, of course, also do some basic calculation. We have a capture with a check, and we have a capture. Which one is the best? It's usually going to be the capture with the check. That is also what the CCT stands for. Checks first, then the captures, and then the threats. So we are up a full knight. So yeah, this should be an easy transition into the endgame. As soon as you are up quite a lot of material, I would say as soon as you are up a piece especially, you want to trade. You want to trade as many pieces as you can to get into the endgame. Or if your opponent is in a very bad position, sometimes you also just want to keep attacking and you might be able to go for a checkmate. What I'm thinking at is moving this rook into their position. Usually rook to the 7th rank is the best thing you can do. Here we also have rook to e6. You might be thinking, well, you are saying all of these moves, but you will be losing a pawn. Yes, that is true, but usually when you are up this much material, it gets to a point where you don't have to worry that much about losing individual pawns. Plus, we would also be able to capture this, basically. And then I think everything is fine and we are in a good position. So I am going to play this. Of course, I'm not saying you don't have to calculate anything and play recklessly. But usually you don't really have to care that much about a single pawn if you are up a lot of material. And here I see a very easy trade. Trading brings us closer to the endgame. And if I'm correct, I think this works as a simple exchange. we attack the rook, we attack the queen, and most likely we are gonna get a trade. And then we are into the endgame with just an extra knight, and that should be a win. I was gonna say if black is really hardcore, probably they could try, I think, try to maybe move the queen, try to keep them connected, not trade, but then everything is gonna collapse on the queen side. So we get the trade, and now we are in the endgame up a knight. So our biggest goal, if possible, would honestly be to trade these rooks. If we can get these rooks traded, I can win this endgame with my eyes closed. But it's not going to be super easy against a good opponent to trade. So instead what I am trying to do is I'm going to try to activate my rook to the 7th rank. Because I can see we have some pressure going on, plus there are also back rank threats potentially. If you see this structure, there might be a back rank checkmate. I will quickly throw in this pawn to a3 because I want to freeze this pawn from pushing so I can capture it. And I think now, honestly, we can just go in with the rook. Yes, they can give us a check. We can always move up with the king. And the good thing is, my knight is actually guarding both of the squares the rook could potentially go to attack our pawn. So I don't really see anything they can do except maybe play a very defensive move or just basically roll over and surrender as they are doing here and giving us all of these pawns. Interesting moment here as well. How do you continue attacking? Do you play rook to c6 or do you play rook to c7? The answer is rook to c7 because you want to attack pawns from the back. Because if they want to protect, they will have to protect from the side. And a rook protecting a pawn from the side, it's never going to last very long. It's always going to collapse. While if you do this, well, oftentimes they might be able to protect it like this. Or even like this, and then your own rook has very limited mobility. So I am going to play rook to c7. And you can see they are protecting. Is there any way for us to push for the advantage? I honestly don't know. I think we might have this move f4, f5 attacking the rook. But very important also in the endgame is that I don't forget about my king. I will have to at some point get my king into the position. So yeah, I have the option to trade pawns, which is in general not a bad thing. I also have the option to attack the rook, but I think honestly they can just keep... I was going to say keep the rook connected to the pawn, but maybe not. If we attack it with a knight, basically they have to surrender this pawn, and then they will be in a very bad position. So I didn't calculate that deeply when I played this move pawn to f4, but I can see that this is going to lead to a lot of troubles for black if they play this, because we have knight to e4, and basically everything is collapsing. If I can't force the exchange of rooks, what I'm usually going to try is to create a passed pawn, meaning a pawn that cannot be stopped by any other pawn, so we can just push it to victory. So pushing one of these. I have a very simple move here, rook to c5, and I was going to say they basically have to trade rooks. If he hadn't traded rooks, yeah, you can see that would also be a blunder. This, like everything collapses. Now they have to trade a rook, and now we are up a full knight. And when you are up a full knight, it should be super easy. I am going to do what I love, which I call freezing pawns. Basically taking away as many options as I can from my opponent. Look, they don't have a single pawn move anymore, and that's usually my first plan. And then you just have to free them to basically start playing with your king. And since we also have the extra piece, we have the knight, we don't really have to worry about anything. Because even if they would start walking all the way around, grabbing all of the pawns, yeah, this knight will always just sacrifice itself for the final pawn. So what we can basically do is we can try to promote. You could even just pre-move literally until you get a queen. It doesn't matter. Even if you give away the knight here, it doesn't matter because the queen is strong enough to win this. All you have to do is blockade their pawn, basically get closer with your king, as I am doing here. Take this, and then try to create a cage with your queen. And this is just a basic queen versus king checkmate, which you should be able to do. And that is it, a new strategy you can use for the London system. If you want to see me do this for other openings, please leave a comment. I will read them and I will make more videos like this.